All right, everybody. Welcome to our next session. My name is Scott Burlingame. I'm an April board member, and I'll be the facilitator of today's meeting. Thank you all for joining us. This is Growing Partnerships to Improve Housing Options for People with Disabilities. As always, before we start these, I want to mention a few housekeeping items. First off, when you scroll over the screen, a menu bar pops up. Depending on what device you are on, you can find that menu bar at the top or the bottom of the screen. This is where you will find closed captioning for today's session. You can view the captioning by selecting the CC tab on the menu bar. For sign language interpreting, you can find the interpreter on the screen. If you would like to change the size of the screen, if slides are showing, you can select the line in the middle to make the slides larger or smaller. If you have a technical issue, please use the chat feature. You can find the word bubble in the same menu bar. If you would like to turn the chat feature off, if you are using a screen reader, you can do that by pressing Alt+H. For Q&A time, please note that the Q&A box is on the menu bar. Please only submit questions there, as they may get lost in the chat. To ask a question or to make a comment, you can also select the hand option on the menu bar that allows us to know you have a question. For those of you who are on the phone today or using keystrokes, we ask that you press #9 or Alt+Y on your keypad to raise your hand. We will then let you know when you can unmute. You can select the unmute option or Alt+A if you are using keystrokes. Remember, if you join the conversation, please keep all background noise down as much as possible to allow others to hear you clearly. Also, just a nice reminder that when we're all done today, you can fill out the evaluation form that will pop up in the chat at the end of this meeting. And with that, we'll get on to the main part of the presentation, and I'd like to introduce the first speaker, Regina Bai.
Thank you, Scott, so much for that introduction. Hello, my name is Regina Bly, and I am an ILS program officer in the Office of Independent Living Programs with the Administration for Community Living. My pronouns are she and hers, and I'm a Black female with black brown locks, got a blue top on with jewelry, and my background has a bookshelf, knickknacks, pictures, and a plant. I'm so excited to be here with my ACL colleague and other panelists to talk about housing. It's one of the most requested services in independent living. Because of this demand, we're here to provide a brief overview of our collaborative efforts in this space. So let's get started. Today's session is titled Growing Partnerships to Improve Housing Options for People with Disabilities. During this presentation, Daniel Davis, Georgina Alvarez, and Brooke Curtis will introduce themselves and speak a little later. First, I want to provide background information on the Administration for Community Living. So next, I'll talk about when ACL was established. ACL in April, you can go ahead, next slide. ACL was established in April 2012 by combining the Administration on Aging, the Office on Disability, and the Administration on Developmental Disabilities. In following years, additional programs transferred to ACL from other agencies. The independent living programs transferred in 2014. So when ACL was established, it was the first time a new operating division of HHS has been created in about a quarter of a century. To give you an idea of how long the other operating divisions have been around, the FDA was founded in 1906 and the CDC was founded in 1946. So you can see it's been a long time. Now, let's go to the next slide and review ACL's mission and vision. The mission is to maximize the independence, well-being, and health of older adults, people with disabilities across the lifespan, and their families and caregivers. The vision is all people, regardless of age and disability, live with dignity, make their own choices, and participate fully in society. ACL believes in the dignity of risk and therefore works to empower older people and people with disabilities to live independently. Moving to the next slide. Quickly, I want to touch on the Biden-Harris administration priorities that HHS is supporting to help deliver relief to American families. A few of these priorities include addressing COVID-19, the climate, and the economy. I will cover more of these priorities in a bit. For the purpose of this presentation, I want to focus on racial equity because it's at the center of the agenda with the whole of government approach to embed racial justice across federal agencies, policies, and programs. The administration is working to deliver criminal justice reform and disparities in healthcare access and education, strengthen fair housing, and restore federal respect for tribal sovereignty. The intersection of identities such as disability, age, gender, race, religion, etc., can create systemic barriers for people seeking full inclusion. This policy will aid in everyone's ability to have an equal chance to get ahead. All right, next slide. Now it's time for us to set the stage. For my presentation, I'll provide an overview of IO programs established by the Title VII of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Then I'll discuss the HHS and HUD partnership, and then leave you with a few resources for you to browse at your own leisure. Moving to the next slide, we can now discuss the overview of IO programs established by Title VII of the Rehab Act. The Title VII has two programs. It's the Centers for Independent Living and the Independent Living Services. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you are probably within independent living, so some of this information is pretty familiar to you. So for those who aren't familiar, there's over 350 CILs across the nation and territories. They're required to provide core services. Today, I'm not going to get into that, but Georgina will probably discuss this more in her presentation. What I would like to do is talk about the other services that CILs are providing. Before I do that, I will give you a brief overview of the Independent Living Services Program, which I manage. There's 56 Part B grants that are awarded to states for the purpose of supporting and expanding independent living across the network. These includes 56 designated state entities, DSEs, 56 state independent living council chairs, and 46 SILC executive directors. That's a total of 155 grantees and recipients that are part of the ILS program. So moving back to the other services that Centers for Independent Living provides, there's a whole list of these services, but I wanted, for the purpose of this presentation, to focus on the two most requested services, and that's with transportation and housing. So on the screen, I have a red table with a gradient that has other IL services requesting and receiving. So for transportation, 63,981 consumers requested services to transportation. 60,855 of those individuals received services. For housing, there was 57,285 consumers that requested services, and 50,197 of those individuals actually received the service. This information comes from the CILS program performance reports from fiscal year 18, and that's the program year for FY19. So the reason why I bring this up, because it's pretty clear that in order for these CILs to begin to receive the core services, you first have to deal with the housing and transportation. And you'll notice that there are some of these CILs that are working with individuals that still need help in housing and transportation. And so that means that they're on a wait list, or they're trying to learn how to use transportation, or they're trying to figure out, because they're living in a food desert and they don't have access to transportation, so they can easily go pick up their groceries or go shopping or even go to the doctor. All right, next slide. Moving forward, I'd like to talk about the current housing landscape inside of ACL and HHS. And this one I think is important because we're really trying to focus on housing. For many people with disability of all ages, community living requires that they have access to affordable, accessible housing and volunteer services to assist with long-term services and supports. For people with disabilities of all ages to have access to both the housing and the services and supports they need to live in the community, there must be a collaborative and coordinated effort between housing and service systems at all levels of government. That's why the Department of Health and Human Services and HUD announced their partnership in July of this year. And so the partnership will help to coordinate and align each department's respective resources and build and strengthen partnerships between HHS and HUD networks and grantees at state and local levels. The fact sheet is associated with the PowerPoint presentation, and that fact sheet will be included in the chat box for you to review and to look at the statistics that are associated with it. Moving to the next slide, I want to talk about the HHS and HUD partnership. It will enable more people with disabilities and older adults and people experiencing homelessness to maintain or obtain accessible, affordable housing. It will advance key priorities of the Biden-Harris administration. Earlier, I talked about racial equity, but it also will expand accessible and affordable housing, address homelessness, expanding HCBS, and addressing the institutional bias in America's long-term care system. The partnership would help states and communities to take full advantage of the opportunities in the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. Moving to the next slide, there's a continuation with the partnership priorities, and that's with assisting people with disabilities of all ages who want to transition out of institutions into their own homes or other integrated housing in the community, helping people with disabilities and older adults age in place and avoid admission into an institution, and supporting people with disabilities or chronic conditions and older adults to exit homelessness and obtain and maintain stable housing. Next slide. So I quickly went over the HUD and HHS priorities because my colleague Daniel Davis is going to dig deeper on the policy end of this. And so I wanted to leave enough time for him to expand on this piece and other important resources for you to know about. But before Daniel starts, I want to also let you know that there's going to be additional links that will be provided in the chat where you can again find the housing fact sheet so that you can dig deeper into the details according to the fact sheet. Also, if you want to know more information about Centers for Independent Living, the ILS programs and other housing resources, those links will be available. You can reach out to me. I'll put my contact information in the chat box if you have any questions that will not be answered during this presentation. So now to Daniel Davis, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Regina. Next slide, please. So, hi, my name is Daniel Davis. Good afternoon. I wanted to first introduce myself. I'm a health policy analyst with the Administration for Community Living in the Center for Policy and Evaluation, Office of Policy Analysis and Development. I'm a white male with a green top and dark rimmed glasses. My pronouns are he, him, his. In the background, I have a painting of a small town, a window with the blinds closed, and a closet with hanging clothes. So now on to the discussion of the dual challenges that we're facing regarding housing, the need for both accessible and affordable housing. First of all, a good place to start with this is to refer to the Money Follows the Person report to Congress, which the link is in the slide. It basically found that the lack of affordable and accessible housing, including housing choice vouchers, poses the biggest barrier to transitions to the community reported by the states. MFP has been a major catalyst for interagency collaboration between health and housing to help individuals in institutions to locate and secure affordable and accessible housing in the community. And this has been a key achievement of the MFP demonstration. Many Money Follows the Person grantees extended their interagency collaborations started under the Money Follows the Person demonstration to HUD's Section 811 Project Rental Assistance, which I will discuss later in this presentation. Next slide, please. So when we look at affordable housing, one of the touchstones, one of the places where I normally go to look at what matters of affordable housing is the priced out reports issued by the Technical Assistance Collaborative with the Consortium of Citizens with Disabilities. Their most recent report is the 2017 priced out report based on 2016 data. And they found at that time that there was absolutely no market in the United States where a person with a disability whose sole source of income was SSI could afford a safe and decent rental unit. The national average rent for a studio or efficiency at that time was $752, which is equal to 99% of a monthly SSI payment. And according to HUD data, 1 in 8 renter households, 13% of those with what are known as worst case needs, include people with disabilities under the age of 62. If anything, the COVID-19 pandemic and surging housing prices in urban centers have only exacerbated the affordable housing crunch. According to a report from Apartment List, which is a rental housing website, national median rents have risen 16% just from January to September, which is 5 times larger than the usual increase. And as we all know, eviction moratoria that protected individuals at risk are now expiring. Next slide, please. Equally serious is the fact that accessible housing is in scarce supply. A 2015 HUD Policy Development and Research study entitled The Accessibility of America's Housing Stock Analysis of the 2011 American Housing Survey looked at the prevalence of features that make units accessible for people with disabilities in US housing stock. They found that US housing stock, unsurprisingly, is not well equipped to accommodate people with disabilities, even as that need grows. They classified units into 3 categories of accessibility: potentially modifiable, livable for individuals with moderate mobility difficulties, and wheelchair accessible. About 1/3 of the units in the country fell into the potentially modifiable category. Less than 5% accommodated individuals with moderate mobility disabilities, and less than 1% were considered wheelchair accessible. Newer multifamily housing, as well as housing in the West, South, and Midwest, is more likely to be wheelchair accessible or accommodate moderate mobility disabilities, but older housing, as you might imagine, generally does not. Next slide, please. We've seen some complaints in major cities in recent years that demonstrate how scarce accessible housing is, even where there are large numbers of units available. A few years ago, a whistleblower revealed that Los Angeles had falsely represented its housing as compliant with Fair Housing Act requirements, which led to a 2017 lawsuit by the Department of Justice and disability advocates. Similarly, Access Living sued Chicago, alleging that several city agencies have failed to comply with the ADA 504 and the Fair Housing Act. With major cities and metropolitan areas not complying with these minimal legal requirements and wheelchair accessible housing stock at less than 1% of the overall supply, it's fair to say there's a crisis in the supply of accessible, affordable housing for people with disabilities. Next slide, please. Now, I'm just going to briefly post for you some research that has been done, which supports these concerns. There was a study by Brucker, Helms, and Souza in 2018, based on HUD administrative data connected to National Health Interview Survey data. It basically found that people with disabilities comprise a large portion of the adult residents of HUD and HUD-assisted housing, 44%. It found that housing assistance made housing more affordable for adults with disabilities, but that assisted households still face major challenges finding accessible rental units. And it also found that people with disabilities in HUD housing face significant health disparities in relation to their peers without disabilities. Next slide, please. So you may have heard of the term social determinants of healthcare, which really, I think, for us, presents a new window on why partnerships between housing and healthcare matter. The definition of social determinants of healthcare is posted here, and basically, social determinants of health are shaped by the distribution of money, power, and resources throughout local communities, nations, and the world. And housing is a significant social determinant. Next slide, please. Research shows that barriers to access in housing contribute to social isolation, as well as poorer health and community living outcomes. This understanding has led to increased focus on housing as healthcare and an increased emphasis on housing and healthcare partnerships. Next slide, please. So a study that was done by the Rural Institute in Montana by Lily Greiman and Craig Ravesloot really provides some clarity on the interaction between housing accessibility and community participation. This study looked at housing characteristics of households with wheeled mobility device users and data from the American Health Survey. And basically, it's using 2011 American Housing Survey data and the home modification module. It looked at accessibility features in the kitchen, bathrooms, and as well as wide doors, handrails, and accessibility of housing entrances. And it basically found that high levels of home inaccessibility across all groups and variables. The majority of those with mobility disabilities may not be living in accessible homes. Next slide, please. Further findings: renters are more likely than owners to lack accessibility features, which is a product in part of the fact that you actually have to restore rental housing to its original condition when you vacate the premises. Barriers that were especially common for home entrances were over 50% of renters indicated that they had to negotiate a step. Around 25% of rental households included a person with a mobility impairment that had a flight of stairs to enter or exit the housing unit, which is a serious barrier to traverse, obviously. And 50 to 65% of homes with wheeled mobility users didn't have an accessible kitchen, while 40 to 60% did not have an accessible bathroom. So these are formidable barriers. And they present, next slide, please. They present a threat to health and well-being due to the risk for injury. Stairs, inaccessible kitchens, bathrooms, and more, the lack of grab bars in bathrooms, for instance. And these threats are exacerbated for people who use wheeled mobility. And it's also a significant barrier to employment and community participation, because if you can barely get out of your house or you need assistance to get out of your house, it obviously interferes. Next slide, please. So here I just wanted to highlight that research on social determinants of healthcare is now looking at why housing partnerships matter. There's a study by the Brookings Institution known as Housing as a Hub for Health, Community Services, and Upward Mobility by Stuart Butler and Maria Cabello. And one of their primary recommendations was to experiment with different models to organize, manage, and expand housing-based supportive services demonstration pilots for elderly households, but they also spoke to people with disabilities on this. Next slide, please. Their recommendation number 4 basically said that the federal government should expand housing and health partnerships for the elderly and disabled, including money follows the person and HCBS waivers, and that Medicaid should aggressively and creatively use HCBS waivers to add flexibility and permit approaches that help people with chronic conditions to be established in housing, using their housing as a hub and reducing healthcare costs. Next slide, please. Another such study that looked at this, and I'm just going to touch on this very quickly, is Social Determinants as Public Goods, a new approach to financing key investments in healthy communities, by noted health policy expert Len Nichols and Lauren Taylor. They wrote that few payment reform options can rival the cost-saving potential of squarely addressing the deficits in social determinants of health that constrain health and drive spending trajectories for many low-income Americans. And they specifically looked at challenges and barriers to collaboration between healthcare organizations and community-based providers such as CILs, and made recommendations accordingly. Next slide, please. Very quickly, I'm just going to turn to a couple examples of past work of the HUD HHS collaboration, specifically the 811 Project Rental Assistance, which some of you may have heard of and which I referred to earlier. The background for this was in the Frank Melville Supportive Housing Act of 2010, which revitalized and reformed Section 811 supportive housing for persons with disabilities. It created stronger financing incentives, but it also authorized what was known as project rental assistance to systemically create integrated, scattered site, affordable supportive housing units with tenant right protections and voluntary supportive services. No more than 25% of the units in any development are designated for supportive housing. And the goal is to make it easier to get affordable housing to the people who need it, including the homeless and those returning to the community under Money Follows the Person, Community First Choice, and Olmstead implementation. Next slide, please. The 811 Project Rental Assistance Notice of Funding Availability, which was initially issued, was jointly drafted by HUD and HHS, and this was a forerunner of the collaboration that's now happening. It reflected considerable input by ACL to our colleagues at HUD. It required joint application and coordination between state housing and health and human services agencies. It also featured joint selection panels comprised of HUD and HHS staff to ensure that there was thoughtful review from both perspectives. And Money Follows the Person participants and others transitioning to the community were a priority population. So far, there have been 3 funding rounds. The first in February 2013 was 98 million to 13 states, assisting in the development of 3,350 units. The second round was in March 2015, and that was 150 million to 25 states. And the most recent round came just in November of last year, when HUD awarded a third round of about 40 million to 7 states. Next slide, please. One other place that we can look is mainstream housing vouchers. There, over $500 million has been authorized between fiscal years 2017 and fiscal year 2019 appropriations. The first 230 million has resulted in 27,000 vouchers across 435 public housing authorities, and 87 million more dollars was distributed by the CARES Act. The goals are to provide more funding to assist non-elderly persons with disabilities transitioning out of institutional and other segregated settings, at risk of institutionalization, homeless, or at risk of becoming homeless. Next slide, please. HUD, again, partnered with HHS to design this NOFA with representatives from both CMS and ACL, as well as the Assistant Secretary for Planning and Evaluation at HHS, all involved. And ratings criteria were drawn from previous ASBE and HHS evaluations. We reflected lessons learned from previous demonstrations to ensure that partner health and human service agencies and disability organizations have demonstrated capacity in referral and application processes and have the right partnerships. With that, next slide, and we'll turn to questions.
Okay, and so far we have one question that was put into the Q&A. Whoops, this is Scott again. And now a whole bunch of questions just popped up here. Okay, first off, Peter Pike asks, and Regina, this was during your part. He asked, are the numbers presented on housing and transportation unduplicated? In other words, could one person have requested housing services multiple times, or was it unduplicated?
Hi, Peter. It's great to hear from you. That is actually a really good question. So I'm not going to give you the answer during this presentation because I think that one is where I'll have to have some research on that. I'll focus on the independent living services PPR. And so I don't want to provide any information that isn't correct. So I posted my contact information in the chat, so I can follow up with you offline to give you that answer and provide it to the rest of, provide it to April so that they can include it with the presentation as well.
Thank you, Regina. Next from Jake Morris, we have, what would you say is the driving force behind the lack of complexes with accessible housing? Is it greedy landlords looking to optimize profit, or is there more to it than that?
Okay, what I would say to that is that I think that there are some challenges with lack of it, with landlords not seeing the incentives. We would argue that there are already significant incentives in place, but there is obviously a lot more that can and needs to be done. I would say that their profit is certainly one factor, but I would say that there are other things that are clearly driving the prices of housing up, as the rise in housing costs during the pandemic is at a rate that is 5 times normal. And so it would be very unlikely that changes of that size would be just due to standard behavior.
Okay, thanks, Daniel. Next, we have a question from Catherine. This says, will the administration or HUD advance strategies to increase affordable and accessible housing described in the Inclusive Home Design Act, AKA the Eleanor Smith Act? For example, expand accessibility and universal design requirements for all housing units being built with affordable housing funds.
Okay, so what I would say, this is Daniel again, what I would say to that is that we definitely see a lot of worthy features in inclusive home design legislation. As far as specific proposals, I think it is too early to say at this point, what type of proposals or recommendations in particular the partnership will pursue. But we would just note that it would seem like there would be opportunities to do demonstrations or evaluations of how inclusive home design, of how inclusive home design promotes accessible, affordable housing and some of the benefits that would seem to be an area that is ripe for future research, in my own personal view.
Thanks, Daniel. This is Scott again. How would you go about addressing the lack of places to rent? Quinn asked that question.
And I think that is obviously an ongoing challenge. I think that one of the things that we are trying to do, and that the Biden-Harris administration has been trying to do, and that frankly HUD and HHS have been trying to do for years, is to get funding models such as the HUD project rental assistance into the field, to get that money out there, to promote deeper collaboration, to provide technical assistance between state housing and health and human services agencies, and also to increase awareness. Frankly, not enough state housing folks are aware of the IL network, and what resources the IL network has to offer. For example, in terms of providing pipelines of people with disabilities who are in need of the housing. Sometimes the jurisdictions are actually struggling to match the available housing with people in need, and it needs to be better understood that Centers for Independent Living are out there with people who they've identified and screened who meet a lot of the characteristics that are sought after for these demonstrations. I think one policy change potentially that could be pursued that I think would help matters would be down the road addressing issues of modifications of rental housing, because it does seem problematic that every time you rent housing, when you vacate, you have to restore it to the original inaccessible state. So in terms of policy changes that might help with that's one that I could point to.
Daniel, I'd like to add to that as well. And I
Sure.
think that it would be a coordinated effort for consumers to continue advocacy on a regular basis. And this is with working with Centers for Independent Living, just as Daniel recommended, and also working with your local housing authorities and getting on boards and serving on boards and attending meetings and letting them know the specific needs that are needed in housing. I think those are going to be critical pieces to add to what Daniel just mentioned. I know that there, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, there's a focus on strengthening fair housing for a policy for the Biden and Harris administration. And for that to work properly, there has to be a coordinated effort from federal, state, and with the people who need that type of assistance. So always continue working with your Centers for Independent Living and also directly with these organizations that provide assistance so that there's affordable and available, accessible housing.
We do have one question who they have their hand up. Amira, you can go ahead and ask your question if you want to unmute. Oh, I'm guessing you lowered your hand. There you go.
My apologies. I was trying to switch my phone and I accidentally hit the raise your hand key. I do apologize.
That's okay. Thank you for joining.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we have one more question then. At least one more, maybe two. We have an anonymous asked, interested to learn what action has been taken to address the adherence to ADAG requirements in new construction, holding architects, code officials, or building officials in the approval of construction plans.
Okay, I can try to take that at least briefly. I would say that there have definitely been some efforts taken. I'd say that chances are probably not to the extent that advocates would like, but there definitely are some firms out there that are pursuing inaccessible construction and trying to mitigate it. Plus, I know that Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division has over the years looked particularly in the multifamily space to file lawsuits when multifamily companies and developers are claim to be accessible, but then people with disabilities go in to try to rent the location and aren't able to access the facilities. So that I could try to provide more information offline, but I think Regina also did provide some response to that with her discussion of fair housing. I think that one of the keys, is to make sure that the fair housing programs through HUD receive adequate funding, and so that there can be testers going in and testing the accessibility of buildings. And it's also important that Department of Justice continues its enforcement efforts.
Okay, and we did have one more question in the chat as well from Christina that I think is a good one. I want to make sure I get in. It's, what guidance can you provide when housing providers in your community require 3.5 times rent to buy eligible for leasing apartments, and individuals who live on fixed incomes are often left out because of this requirement? They will also not rent to people who receive Social Security and who do not, and they do not consider it a source of income.
What I would say to that is, first of all, I do know that a number of states have turned to passing source of income, restrictions on source of income discrimination. And I think that's a very important outlet for addressing some of this. One of the things that can sometimes be funded under money follows the person and similar demonstrations is essentially down payments or security deposits. But that is an ongoing challenge, and I would say that some of what needs to happen is probably local advocacy and pointing out to landlords that people getting out of institutions don't have that kind of cash on hand.
Okay, there was a lot of questions, but we need to get back to the rest of the presentation. So I think we're going to hand it off to Brooke Curtis next.
Hey, thanks, Scott. Again, this has been a great presentation and good questions coming in, so please keep them coming. I'm Brooke Curtis. I'm the Associate Director of Training and Publications for the ILNet, which is the National Training and Technical Assistance Center for Independent Living. And it's operated by Independent Living Research Utilization, ILRU. And my pronouns are she, her, and a visual description of me is I'm a Black woman with a curly afro and red glasses, and I'm wearing a gray turtleneck sweater. So if we could go to slide 30, please. Awesome. I'm going to provide an overview of the ILNet Learning Collaborative that was operated in 2019. And really, this is a training opportunity that we provide to a small cohort of SILs. So a learning collaborative is designed to allow in-depth exploration of topics by a small group focused on specific goals. And so the Housing Learning Collaborative was focused on housing. And really, it's a great opportunity for centers to come together and brainstorm challenges and set goals and really learn from each other. So in this learning collaborative, the timeline is usually there's a kickoff meeting, and then there's monthly calls and assignments. And then each center will do a final presentation that covers the progress that they made during the collaborative. And then I have beyond the collaborative here because really the learning collaboratives are great because centers are building relationships with each other and continuing those relationships once the learning collaborative is over. Often the learning collaboratives are facilitated by content experts, but really what we say is each center is really bringing their own experience and expertise to the collaborative. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight the centers that were that participated in the 2019 Housing Learning Collaborative here. And also the ILNet offers learning collaboratives on various topics. So we've done some on housing, we did one on housing, we've done some on youth transition and business acumen as well. So if you want to drop it in the chat, if you've participated in an ILNet learning collaborative, that'd be great. And then we can go on to the next slide too. Awesome. So just wanted to highlight some of the outcomes from the 2019 Housing Learning Collaborative. We had signing a memorandum of understanding with Habitat for Humanity Housing, solidifying partnerships with developers and advocating for affordable housing options, creating a community of visitable tiny homes for low-income individuals to have a chance at home ownership, offering community housing meetings to discuss new housing projects and upcoming legislation, hosting a landlord appreciation event, and developing curriculums to prepare consumers to rent. All right, we could go to the next slide. So really slides this slide and the next slide are just to highlight an example of what goals were set by one of the centers that participated in the Learning Collaborative, which was the Ability Center of Greater Toledo. So they had their short-term goals, which they really focused on during the collaborative timeframe. And then on the next slide, slide 34, we could go there. They had long-term goals, which they're going to work on past the Learning Collaborative, and they're continuing to work on. All right, if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so we've had a lot of discussion today about partnerships. So I did want to highlight one of the CILs that participated, their partnerships when it comes to housing. So they participate in the continuum of care meetings, and they're part of committees and can vote on issues and new board members. They're also involved in the Metropolitan Development Housing Agency. So they receive mainstream housing vouchers for individuals who have a disability. They have a partnership with the Housing Development Agency. Also Next Day Access, which is a project with a contractor who designs and modifies homes and businesses. Habitat for Humanity. And then they host an ADA event with a local art museum. And then they continue referrals to agencies like Urban Housing Solutions, Woodbine Community, Catholic Charities, and Salvation Army, who all have extensive housing programs. And then they also have a relationship with the Mayor's Advisory Council. So just wanted to take a little bit of time before turning things over to Georgina to hear from y'all. So if you wanted to tell us a little bit more about what opportunities you're seeing in terms of partnerships, and then what housing partners you have, you can drop that in the chat and we'll read a few out. Awesome. So while y'all are doing that, if we could go to slide 36. All right. So just wanted to say that I wanted to highlight a few findings from a recent COVID-19 survey that was conducted by ILRU and the Collaborative on Health Reform and Independent Living to better understand the impacts of the pandemic on CILs and consumers. So this survey was conducted in April and May of 2020, and there were 144 that completed the survey. And really what it showed is that food and housing were primary concerns for consumers, in addition to health and healthcare, personal assistance, income and benefits, and social isolation. And really the survey showed us that the need for affordable, accessible housing has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So we know that housing is critical for transition and diversion. So ILRU is continuing to conduct a survey that is actually specific to transition. And so we're hoping to have those results reported soon. And so we will share that with the field once we do. Awesome. And I'll go ahead and turn things over to Georgina.
Hi, thank you, Brooks. And hi, everyone. My name is Georgina Alvarez. I'm the Associate Director with CISO. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm wearing a blue shirt. I'm original from Mexico, so I was born and raised in Mexico, in Guanajuato. So I was, I immigrated to the United States in about 2000 and graduated high school, went to college, and now here I am. So we can go to the next slide. Probably the next one. Ready to go. So who we are, just a little bit of what we do, and how we do services. So we are one of the 28 ILCs in California. Of course, we do the IL services as well as the rapid housing and homeless prevention services in that county. We do serve the Tri-County areas of Moray, San Benito, and Santa Cruz counties. We can go to the next slide. So what CISO has been working on in terms